U.S. ambassador to Libya. This administration's focus since that event has been on pursuing those who did harm to Americans, who killed Americans, and bringing them to justice, and taking action to ensure that the failures in security that helped cause this or lead to this event were addressed and changed. What we have seen since hours after the attack, beginning with a statement by the Republican nominee for president, is an attempt by Republicans to politicize a tragedy. And that continues today and yesterday. How much time has been spent focused on talking points that could have been spent on moving forward to help create jobs in this country and move the economy, grow the economy? How much time also has been spent, obviously, on show votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act, something that a majority of Americans have said clearly they don't want to happen.
But Jay, in November of 2012, the President said, I think it's important to find out what happened in Benghazi, and I'm happy to cooperate in any ways that Congress wants. We have provided every bit of information that we have.
Right.
That email was not provided.
Have you read the email, Jim?
I have it right in front of me.
Okay. So here's the thing. Back a year ago now, roughly, when Republicans on Capitol Hill were feeding information to reporters about what was in a bunch of emails that had been given to congressional investigators, feeding false information about what was in those emails and in those talking points that were produced by the CIA, we voluntarily released all the information regarding those talking points, causing news organizations to have to correct what they had reported because it turned out to be false because they were lied to by folks on Capitol Hill about what was contained within them. You've seen the deputy director of the CIA testify repeatedly, including, I believe, last week, that the CIA produced those talking points. He made the decisions about what ultimately would go in those talking points, and that he felt no political influence from the White House or anywhere else about what should go in the talking points that were such a focus of conversation, the talking points that were provided to members of Congress of both parties and by this administration to our representative who was going out on the Sunday shows to talk about Benghazi and everything else that was happening in the Muslim world at the time, which included huge protests outside of numerous diplomatic facilities, violent protests that included, scaling of walls, taking down the American flag, Molotov cocktails and the like, right? The talking points that Ambassador Rice used, again, produced by the intelligence community for members of Congress, and in the interest of having everybody use the same information used by the administration and Ambassador Rice on those Sunday shows, were divulged. And like so many of the conspiracy theories that have been promulgated by Republicans from the beginning of this one turned out to be bogus, right? The documents released through a FOIA request by the State Department that include the email that you're talking about are explicitly about the broader areas, separate from the attack on Benghazi.
But they go to talking points. It talks about the goal being to underscore that these protests are rooted in an internet video.
I'm sorry, did you say protests? You said protests, right? So that is, read the talking. They are about, there's a Q&A about the protests happening in Tunis, in Khartoum, in Cairo, everywhere.
But at that time, that was this administration's explanation as to what happened.
No. Let's just get to the facts here, okay? So in this the CIA talking points, it said that. Well, you just said it did. The currently available information suggests that the demonstrations in Benghazi were spontaneously inspired by the protests at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo and evolved into a direct assault against the U.S. consulate and subsequently its annex. That language comes from the CIA-produced talking points that have been the focus of discussion now for some time, that produced another dry hole in the effort to prove a conspiracy by Republicans. As Mike Morrell, Deputy CIA Director at the time, and so many others have testified, this was based on what was, as it says here, the currently available information suggests. The fact that some of it, that a lot of it was murky then, that some of it turned out to be different from what an analyst thought was the case at the time is something that we've discussed repeatedly, right? The fact of the matter is, and I would encourage you to go back and look at what was happening and what was being reported during that entire week, is that there were potentially dangerous and violent and even fatal protests happening at facilities everywhere. And so there was these basic top lines about that. But on the specific issue of the Benghazi attack, our representative, the administration's representative who went out on the Sunday shows, the UN ambassador, relied on points provided to the Congress and to the administration that were produced by the intelligence committee and, the intelligence community. And, I feel like we've been through that, right? Is there nothing, and there's nothing in the emails yesterday. Look, if the email that you're talking about had been, if you had seen it earlier, what would you have said? Well, it doesn't really have a bearing on the CIA talking points that we released because Republicans staffers on the Hill were feeding them to some reporters, falsely characterizing them, and we felt it was necessary to set the record straight. So voluntarily, we provided them to you. And it turned out that the charges were bogus. Well, you know what? That's not the first charge that was bogus. The one about the idea that there was a military stand-down order that got a lot of airtime on some channels. Bogus, right? Conspiracy theory that turned out not to be true.
So all of this is politically motivated?
All of what?
All of these questions, the fact that these questions are contempt. At this point, does
when Darrell Issa gets up and says what he said today, I don't know, you guys be the judge.
All right, let me ask you, does the White House have a firm understanding of what happened to those Americans that night?
There is an active investigation to find the people responsible. There is an active investigation into the details. There was the answer broadly is
18 months ago.
There's
still no firm grasp as to what happened. I'm just
well,
asking.
no, I think that many.
Was it a video? Was it protests?
You should ask the intelligence community what their current assessment of what happened was. That what we know is that there was an attack, that there were extremists involved, and 4 Americans were killed. We have been saying that from the beginning. Again, if you look at the language provided at the time by the IC to members of Congress and the White House, that's what Ambassador Rice stuck to. And as I said and others, it was based on what we believed to be true at the time. And they were caveating all the time about the fact that more information might become available, more details might become available, and as they did, there would be more information to provide. What hasn't changed has been the effort by Republicans to claim a conspiracy when they haven't been able to find one. And what we have done is provide 25,000 pages of documents. We have provided officials who have testified on Capitol Hill. We've spent a lot of time in this room and elsewhere talking about it. And the focus should be on making sure that what happened outside of the diplomatic facilities in Benghazi doesn't happen again. And yet, in the president's budget, he proposes investing $4.6 billion to secure overseas personnel and facilities, including sufficient funding to support embassy security construction funding of $2.2 billion, as recommended by the Accountability Review Board, chaired by Admiral Mullen and Ambassador Pickering. But Congress hasn't acted on that. Instead, they're holding hearings about talking points, right? So you might want to ask them why they haven't acted on this. By the way, those are recommendations from an Accountability Review Board that at various times Republicans have tried to impugn. An Accountability Review Board led or co-chaired by the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff appointed by President George W. Bush. And again, they come back to this, and instead of focusing on what the real issues are here, which is there were serious problems identified in a very critical report, an independent report produced by, again, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and one of the most celebrated diplomats serving administrations of both parties, that outlined 29 recommendations that ought to be taken. And the Secretary of State at the time immediately accepted all of them, despite the fact that it was a pretty critical report, and began implementing all of them. That should be the focus.
Jacob?
Ed, it's your turn.
If the email was not about Benghazi, as you said yesterday and say again today, why did the White House turn it over to a conservative group seeking information about Benghazi?
You would have to ask the State Department about how they responded to FOIA requests. I would, again, point you to the fact that, I mean, all you have to do is read it, Ed, right? Top line points, goals, that kind of stuff. The only mention of Benghazi in the email is a question about what's your response to a story by the Independent newspaper in the UK that says we had intelligence 48 hours in advance of the attack that was ignored. Not aware of any actionable intelligence was the answer. And then what does it do? It cuts and pastes the same line from the CIA talking points that, again, was what Ambassador Rice used.
So if it's not about Benghazi, why turn it over in a Benghazi suit? It seems...
You would have to ask State Department about their process for responding to FOIA requests. Again, you can just read it and then decide for yourself. As many people have now said and written, like, this is a conspiracy in theory in search of a conspiracy.
The conservative group comes in and says, we want Benghazi documents. The administration says, this is not a Benghazi document, so we're not turning it over, right?
Again, I don't, like, this is a State Department FOIA request response. Yeah, but again, whether it was released Monday or a week ago Monday or whatever, it doesn't change the fundamental facts about the so-called talking points, which, despite great efforts by your news organization and others, have been, proven not to be a conspiracy. Mike Morrell, the deputy director of the CIA, served at the CIA for decades under administrations of both parties, said that he felt no political influence when he was directing the composition of those points, and it was based on what he believed was the best analysis of what happened at the time. And in the very first sentence of those points, it said currently available information in a situation which, by the way, was incredibly murky and chaotic, halfway around the world, not in a capital, but in a regional city at a diplomatic facility. So,
putting aside Republican Darrell Issa, retired Brigadier General Robert Lovell testified today. He was at AFRICON. I have no idea if he's a Democrat, Republican, Independent. Testified under oath that by 3:15 a.m. after the 9/11/2012 attack, they dismissed the video and very quickly identified this as a terror attack. By 3:15 a.m., he testifies under oath. In light of that, why on 9/14, 2.5 days later, was Ben Rhodes writing an email about the general state of affairs, as you say, highlighting the video and not highlighting terror?
Ed, the email was about protests around the region. If you want to tell me today that the protests and then again,
Cairo, a lot of places, but Benghazi was part of it, right?
Right, and I would refer you to the CIA-produced talking points on that referred at the time to currently available information suggesting that there were protests outside of the facility in Benghazi inspired by demonstrations outside of Cairo. What inspired those demonstrations outside of our embassy in Cairo? Do you even remember?
There was Cairo. I don't remember specifically. There was a.
Does anybody remember?
Flag
Can
burned,
we do a little call and
Yes,
response?
they were trying to get the blind sheikh out of jail, and then to get more people in, they started talking about it in certain videos.
Okay. I think there was a lot of tumult in the region. Daily Caller's been heard from, but backing you up, Ed. But the
that was your call.
but the but I think it's fair to say that most people remember that there were demonstrations around the region, right, Scott? I mean, that were in reaction to what people felt was an offensive video. And there were demonstrations outside of U.S. facilities because the video was produced in the United States. So again, that's what, it's pretty clear if you read it that that's what it's about. When it comes to the connection between the protests in Cairo and what happened in Benghazi, that's drawn directly from from talking points produced by the intelligence community, as testified to by the deputy director of the CIA on multiple occasions.
Point earlier about